Alrighty, let's take a look at units of activity method, also called the units of production method. The units of production method. And the reason it's called the units of production method or the units of activity method is because the depreciation is actually calculated on the asset's lifetime activity and actually what it's doing. So for instance, if it's a truck, we may want to do that because we want to calculate the depreciation based on the miles it's driven each year, and then actually multiply a factor times the actual miles. So therefore, it's a better gauge for an asset when you can determine that asset's activity. And so it's used interchangeably, units of production or units of activity method. The formula for that, very similar to the straight line formula, is cost minus salvage value or residual divided by the useful life of the asset, and instead of in years, it's in units. It's in units. So let's go ahead and take an example on the next page. So here, using the units of activity method, it says we purchased a truck worth $65,000 on 1/1/2012. It has a salvage value of $15,000 and a life of 100,000 miles. So we need to calculate first a depreciation per unit. So in this case, it would be 65,000 minus the salvage value divided by the total useful units, or miles in this case, over the asset's total life. So therefore, we come up with 50 cents per mile. That's what this equals, 50 cents per mile. So then you take this amount and you multiply it times 24,000 miles, which is the amount of miles they drove in 2012. 24,000 times 50 cents equals $12,000 of depreciation for the year. So we would debit depreciation expense and credit accumulated depreciation. This is just showing you what it did to the accounting equation, which by now I know you have mastered. So when we take a look at this units of activity method, once we come up with the annual rate, then each year we're going to multiply it times the actual usage. So if in the next year we would multiply it by 23,000. If the following year we drove 22,000, then we would do the 50 cents times each of those. So each year, unlike the straight line depreciation, the depreciation number will change. So let's go ahead and exercise in a minute after we take a look at an example of what I was trying to illustrate. Here in 2012, you can see we drove 24,000. In 2013, we actually drove 22,000. So depreciation was 11,000 here and 12,000 here. So now let's go ahead and exercise on our own. And again, let's turn to page 207. And we're going to go ahead and look at exercise number 6. Exercise number 6 on page 207. City Taxi purchases a new taxi cab for $25,000. Okay, so we got a cab, so the cost of the cab is $25,000. The cab has an estimated salvage value of $1,000, so we plan on obviously driving that cab quite a bit, and is expected to be driven for approximately 120,000 miles over 5 years. Wow, that's a lot of driving. Okay, so what we would do is we would take 25,000 minus the salvage value of 1,000. So minus the salvage value, cost minus salvage, divided by the useful life, which would be the 120,000 would be the useful life per this asset. So that's 120,000 miles. So if we did that with our calculators, so let me go ahead and bring up mine. You can do that to yours as well. I have 25,000 minus $1,000 gives me 24,000 divided by 120,000, which gives me 20 cents per mile. 20 cents per mile. And then in this particular year, we drove, it says calculate the depreciation expense per mile. So this is A of the problem. Prepare a depreciation schedule assuming that the actual miles driven for year 1 through 5 were as follows. So for year 1, we drove 25,000 miles. So it would be 25,000 times 20 cents. So depreciation for year 1 would be $5,000. For year 2, we drove 27,000 miles. So it would be 27 times 20. 27 times 20 is $5,400 of depreciation. So every year you'd be booking a debit to depreciation expense for $5,000 and a credit to accumulated. In year 2, you would book $5,400 to depreciation expense and $5,400 to accumulated depreciation. In year 3, it would be 21,000 miles times 20 cents. So if we calculated that, it'd be 21,000 miles times 20 cents would be 4,200. Year 4 would be 28,000 times 20 cents. 28,000 times 20 cents. That gives us a 5,600. And then in year 5, the depreciation would be 19,000 miles times 20 cents, giving us depreciation for the last year of, go ahead, you can be calculating this too, $3,800. So every year, as you can tell, the depreciation changed depending on the miles. So for units of production or units of activity, you come up with a per unit or per mile amount by using cost minus salvage value divided by useful life of the unit in miles or units or labor hours, and then you will compute each year based on the usage. Now let's go ahead and try our hand at the last method, which is double declining balance.